on Access Tech Live.
Diabetes and accessibility. Why is there a divide? International Day of Persons with Disabilities. How is society doing? And the November edition of Shot of the Shed.
This is Access Tech Live with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo. The latest in tech and accessibility every week. Follow us and get involved now at Access Tech Live.
Hey everyone, welcome along to another episode of Access Tech Live here, live on AMI TV. The clue is in the name. I am Stephen Scott. Great to have you here. Marc Aflalo, how are you this week, sir?
I'm doing great. I had a nice, relaxing week, even though I was working in Miami. Made the mistake of going into a Best Buy the day after Thanksgiving in the U.S. You remember the scene in Jumanji when the animals trample the town? Yeah, that's what it felt like, Stephen.
Oh, that's not good. That is not good. But, it's one of those things, right? Did you get any deals, though? Did you actually buy anything, or did you just see that scene and think, I'm out of here?
You know what? I bought some batteries. My son got a power hub for some gaming device he had. There was really nothing when you travel across the border, it's not like I can bring a 65-inch TV with me unless I leave one of my kids behind. And that was considered, but no, I didn't in the end.
Okay, well, we'll move on swiftly on that one. Coming up today on Access Tech Live, we are talking about diabetes treatment, as you heard in the coming up, of course. Talking about that divide with accessibility, which is unbelievable, really, when you think about it. Derek Lackey is joining us. He's an accessibility advocate who lost his eyesight due to complications with type 1 diabetes, and he weighs in on this subject. That's a subject very close to his heart. Also, Ardra Shepherd is host of the podcast Tripping on Air, and she'll be joining us later to talk about her gift guide giveaway. Ooh, what did I get? Also, we'll be talking all about the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Throughout the show, we'll be talking about that. Of course, that day takes place on Sunday, December 3rd. We'll be discussing and discussing the subject of disability generally, and accessibility and technology and its role and all of that throughout the course of the show. And if that's not enough for you, the host of Now with Dave Brown here on AMI TV, Dave Brown himself, is here with us. But first, before we get into all that, let's get the headlines with Marc.
Now, Access Tech Live headlines.
So for the past several months, Google and the Canadian government have been at odds about compensation for using news stories. It's called the Online News Act. Reports are that the two have come together and made an agreement that will see Canadian news outlets and their information continue to be shared on Google's platforms in return for the company making annual payments to those news companies in the range of $100 million. That's a lot of cash. Microsoft is elevating its commitment to Be My Eyes, our friends of the show, by integrating Be My AI technology into the Microsoft Disability Answer Desk. Now, this new collaboration enhances the Answer Desk's capabilities to assist users who are blind and partially sighted who rely on Microsoft products. Now, through this partnership, individuals can now independently address hardware or software concerns without the need for direct human assistance. Very, very cool. Congrats to, obviously, both of them. Canadian government still in the headlines this week with more than a dozen countries that have signed a document outlining guidelines for the safe development of AI, artificial intelligence. Now, the new AI guidelines focus on 4 areas of development of AI systems: design, development, deployment, and secure operation. The overall goal of this document is to make sure that everyone's on the same page and taking their responsibilities pretty seriously when it comes to our future with AI. Now, the UK and the US governments are the two that kind of came together and started these guidelines, and the goal is to balance the risks and the threats with design and usability. In short, nobody wants computers to take over the world. Friend of the show, Molly Burke, has made Forbes' list of 30 under 30. She's appeared on many different AMI shows throughout the years and became the first blind creator to hit more than 1 million followers on social media. Throughout her young career, she advocates for persons with disabilities, posts about fashion, food, and traveling, and she's spoken at events that include the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, amongst many more. From all of us here at AMI and, of course, Access Tech Live, congrats to Molly. As Stephen said, December 3rd marks the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. This day is all about making sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. in everything from school and work to being part of the community. It's also a day to help everyone understand the challenges that people with disabilities face. We here at Access Tech Live, and especially AMI TV, know what that's all about because we do it every single day by providing people with disabilities a platform to share their interests, concerns, and values through accessible media, reflection, and of course, portrayal. Stephen had a chance to catch up with Fern Lowland, who most recently did the audio description for the Netflix series All the Light We Cannot See.
You have a blind or visually impaired audio describer because it's disabled and non-disabled people collaborating together to create something that's going to, be really meaningful and special to the end user. So it's inclusion on a grand scale, because it's not just inclusion in terms of we're making something for you. It's I'm using and involving blind and visually impaired people at every stage of the process, and I think that's really what's changing the landscape of audio description and making it advance and really kind of promoting that idea of let's work together instead of let's just sort of you benefit from our work, you blind people benefit from our sighted work. It's really nice. It's just a way of including people in such a deeper way.
And of course, we'll be talking more about this throughout this week's show, Mr. Scott.
You need more of that interview on the next episode of Double Tap. Quick plug in there. Yeah, it's such a really, I think that's a great example, isn't it, of what it's all about. As International Day of Persons with Disabilities rolls around this year, I think for a lot of us, it's going to be a time to reflect inside our community as well about what we are more able to do today. And I think it's really good to talk about the positives and the progress as well. So I think this is wonderful. It's a great opportunity to do that. I can't wait to dive in with this with Dave Brown shortly as well. Let's get to our question of the day, though, because it ties into this. If you were to tell someone one thing about your disability, what would it be? That's the question we're asking this week, Mark. Now, this is one you get out of this week, right? You don't have to answer this one. You can sit this one.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for not putting me on the spot.
But I know your son is disabled, so I'm thinking maybe that you do have a view on this, and every view is valid.
It is, and we'll definitely get to it later on the show, along with your comments as well, which you can reach out to and get to us on social media on all platforms. It is at Access Tech Live. If you know the name of the show, obviously you can find us. And if you want to email us, of course, you can do that, feedback@accesstechlive.com as well, and you can get involved. Coming up, after a quick break, we're going to dive into the headlines with a familiar face here on AMI TV, Dave Brown. He's with us next. Stick around.
We want to hear from you. Follow us on social media and get involved at Access Tech Live. We'll be right back. latest in tech and accessibility. This is Access Tech Live with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, if you watch AMI TV, then no doubt you will know our next guest. Marc and I appear on his show regularly, but we thought it would be time to turn the tables. You know him as the host of Now with Dave Brown. Oddly enough, his name is Dave Brown in real life as well. Welcome to Access Tech Live, Dave.
Stephen, they named the show before they hired me. It gave me the inside edge when it came time to apply. I'm so grateful to be here, guys. For all the times that I've put you on the spot, you guys get the opportunity to do it to me today.
Yeah, you get the chance to actually face some of our questions, which I'm quite pleased about. This I've been looking forward to this all week. So yeah, let's dive in. So first off, what's it like being on the other side? How does it feel? Are you nervous?
Little bit nervous. I'm not used to being put on the spot. I usually have a little bit more control. So you guys have taken that away from me, but I trust you. I trust both of you deeply as responsible broadcasters.
Well, that was your first mistake, but okay, we'll let you by. Okay, so let's talk about International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And, I want to ask you first off, are you a person with a disability or are you a disabled person?
Ooh, Stephen, going right for the hot and heavy topics here on person first language when it comes to disability. I would say that I lean towards using person first. So a person with a disability, a person who has albinism, a person who is legally blind. That said, I really try to honor however people want to identify, because I've been on the other side of it where I've described my disability as being vision impaired and actually had people with the pitchforks come out at me and say, we don't say that, that's not a word that we like. So I find when it comes to identifying disability in my own, I prefer person first for me. I do not judge anybody else for what the words that they want to use.
Yeah, I've got to say, Dave, I'm with you on this, right? I am a person with a disability. However, everyone is entitled to identify themselves as they wish. And I think that's the key point out of all of this. We should be able to identify any way we wish, because I can understand why some people put disabled first. But, for me, I'm a person. So I'm totally down on that.
Yeah, it's one of these things that I try not to lose too much sleep over because there are bigger, more pressing issues than simply the order of a couple of words.
Dave, I got to ask you, how do you think the world is doing? And obviously this is opinion, and everybody's opinion is going to be different here. How do you think the world is doing at making sure that we're aware of everybody and all the disabilities that are out there? Because it's a big responsibility that I think we all have on our shoulders. How do you think we're doing?
Mark, it's interesting you asked me that question today because just yesterday, the University of Calgary put out some research about the accessibility of 3 different Canadian cities, Calgary, Vancouver, and Ottawa, and found that 60% of public spaces in those 3 cities were deemed inaccessible. So I think that when you start looking at that kind of data, despite a lot of positive lip service and despite a lot of really great progress, I don't want to lose focus of the progress, but there is still a huge way to go when you're talking about simple things like having doorways that are big enough accessible parking spots, enough elevators, accessible washrooms. Like, this is some of the really basic stuff that unfortunately the world has not quite caught up with yet. That said, the flip side, because I want to be pragmatic and positive, there are so many organizations and people that are devoted to making the change that even if that number is 60% inaccessible today, I've got a lot of faith that that number is going to come down in a significant way over the next 5 to 10 years.
Now, Dave, I know you'll echo this view, mainly because we all like our jobs here. But, I think I'm really proud of being part of AMI and a network that talks about disability every day. And I think that's ultimately it, isn't it? It's the conversation that we have as disabled people that other people can listen into and engage with. So we want to get more people listening into these conversations to understand what the challenges are. Absolutely. I said at the top, I want to talk about the progress. I want to talk about the positives. But you can't ignore the challenges either. You have to talk about everything, right?
It's the real world. At a certain point, you have to put yourself in the real world and understand where these things all connect. But Stephen, when it comes to what we're doing here at AMI, whether it's your show, Access Tech Live, whether it's Kelly and Ramya, whether it's some of the incredible pre-produced programming done across the network as well. One of the things that's become very cool is that disability conversations can be implicit or they can be explicit. Sometimes you and I can have a real explicit conversation simply about some accessible technology or simply about disability culture. But we're also very capable through shows like yours and like mine, where we can have some of these implicit conversations, that we can talk about a new feature in Google Maps or Apple Maps that is not designed for disability per se, but through the perspective of two people who live on the blindness spectrum, that you and I can talk about how we're utilizing that technology, maybe not as the singular focal point, but as either an overall tinting of the conversation or an avenue in or out of the topic. So I think one of the things about AMI and the work we're doing is that sometimes that conversation can be very in your face about disability, and sometimes it's just about platforming people with disabilities who have interests that range well beyond disability itself.
You know, so we talk tech. You know, you mentioned a couple companies right there, some of the big ones. They seem to take on a role of responsibility to make sure awareness about accessibility is constantly in what they do. I got a two-part question for you, Dave. Why do you think they take that so seriously, number one? And what role do you think they have as tech companies in this mission?
Well, Mark, the first answer to your question, which is a great question, I think it's a fundamental understanding of the research that's been done by organizations like the Conference Board of Canada or the Rick Hansen Foundation about the actual economic value of people with disabilities, right? We can have the human rights conversation, and we should have the human rights conversation, but there is a lot of spending power that exists across the community, whether it be people with disabilities themselves as their own individual, or whether it be the other people in their lives. So these tech companies, they know that if they want to sell me their phone or their computer, they better have the features that I like, the high contrast and the large fonts, and an ease of use and ease of usability. So I think purely from a capitalistic point of view, they're doing some of the work that maybe other sectors have not quite figured out the whole way yet. And then the flip side is, I don't want to put too much smoke up the behinds of big tech, but the one thing about big tech is it's in its nature. It's supposed to be cutting edge. So I see that if they're envisioning a future, they are thinking about people with disabilities as part of that future as well. So there's a responsibility. If you're going to reshape society, you have to be thinking about inclusion in that reshaping.
How some of those tools, like, I mean, anything that any of those companies might have come out, is there anything specific that stands out to you as something that you've leveraged, you've taken advantage of, whether it's something you've talked about or something even that we might have talked about in your life that helps you on a day-to-day basis?
You know, this is going to sound like the biggest cop-out in the world, and I apologize, but the smartphone, to me as a person who's legally blind, as just a mainstream piece of technology, is such an amazing tool. I'm young enough to remember a time that I traveled across Canada as a legally blind person and was using maps and using MapQuest and pre-planning routes. How many blocks from the train station did I have to walk south to get to my hotel? I can't even fathom doing that now, knowing the way that I use navigation applications on my phone, also leveraging that in connection with Bluetooth headphones or other wireless headphones. But I'll tell you this. My phone has also eliminated the need for me to carry a magnifying glass around with me. I used to perpetually have to carry a magnifying glass to read the small fonts all over this world that get in my way, or I used to have to carry a telescope around all the time with me if I was traveling to read street signs or read business signs. The fact that I don't necessarily need to carry a bag around with me when I'm making my way around because my camera in my phone serves as a magnifying glass and a telescope. I mean, that is just such a cool thing. So, Mark, I know that's a real cop-out answer, and I apologize for it.
It's okay.
But it's the truth. It's the truth.
I think what's more surprising is you're saying all this and you're an Android phone user, I believe. So I'm kind of amazed that you're finding so much use out of this device. It's incredible. I'm learning things here, Dave. But you mentioned the magnifier, and of course, Google has done a huge amount of work actually in the low vision space. And I think one thing I've often said, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I often feel that Google and Android is a really brilliant product for people with low vision. Not that it's not for blind people, it absolutely is. I joke around a lot, but it is a fantastic product. But the way that the devices are built, the screen quality, the ability to raise that text size up to, 56 point, even in some cases, be more dynamic with that text. It's much more manageable for people on those screens, as big screens. It seems that Google and Android really is a low vision product. What do you say to that? Do you agree?
So I have been a Samsung phone user. Plug for Samsung here. Anytime they wanted to sponsor the show, they're welcome to. Plug for Samsung here. I've been using Samsung Galaxy phones since the second I got a smartphone. And I'll paint the picture for you guys. I was in one of the large Canadian pharmacies that also had a mobile department in the winter of 2011. And the person put an iPhone in my hand and put a Samsung Galaxy in my hand. And he said, Dave, play around. See which one works for you. And Stephen, intuitively, that Samsung phone using the Android operating system, within 30 seconds of touching the phone, I was figuring out how to make the font bigger, how to navigate around. It just, for whatever reason, just intuitively worked for me. And it's only gotten better and better and better as I've gotten newer models over the years. I am brand loyal, maybe to the point of a fault, simply because how easy I find that phone to use from a low vision perspective. Making fonts bigger, zooming in and out. It's like 1 or 2 clicks. It's not a series of going through settings to get it done. When you blow up the fonts on a page, auto-filling, not having to sort of scroll back and forth to the point that your thumbs cramp up. There's just some stuff they do so naturally that makes my experience as a user easy.
Okay, Dave, we can't all be perfect, okay? Okay, I got to ask you, before we let you go, what would your answer to our question of the day be if you were to tell someone one thing about your disability? What would that be?
I would say that it's complicated. Not that your question is complicated, that my disability is complicated, because it's hard to identify any singular barrier that I'm going to encounter on the day-to-day because I'm light sensitive, because I'm legally blind, but because I have a little bit of sight, it can be a little bit of a mishmash. And that's one of those beautiful moments in life where it's a reminder, as maybe you approach a person with a disability, oftentimes asking them open-ended questions about maybe how you might be able to offer them some assistance, or what are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? I think that it's a reminder that disability is not some kind of singular monolith, that people like Stephen and I can both identify as people who are blind, but our needs are not similar. So that would be the big takeaway, that my disability is complicated, that most disability is complicated, and that disability itself is not some singularity. Everyone's bringing their own lived experience to the table.
Yeah, it's just like life itself, right? I mean, that's the part of this that people fail to understand. They don't see the separation at all. Dave, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. I'm so glad you came on the show. Please come back again. There's so much more we could pick up on this. Even though you're an Android user, we will let you come back. Dave Brown, host of, I believe it is still called Now with Dave Brown, hasn't changed in the last hour, so we're good. You're back on air tomorrow. Everyone says you're coming back, so that's fantastic. You can catch the show every day on AMI TV. Of course, there's the podcast as well. Dave, thanks so much for coming on.
It was my great pleasure. Congratulations to both of you. You're tremendous broadcasters. Congratulations on all the success.
Thanks, Dave. Stephen, coming up, an accessibility advocate who's working on making diabetes treatments more accessible. Derek Lackey joins us next here on Access Tech Live.
We want to hear from you. Follow us on social media and get involved at Access Tech Live. We'll be right back. latest in tech and accessibility. This is Access Tech Live with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Access Tech Live. I am Stephen Scott. Marc Aflalo is with me as always. Now, November is Diabetes Awareness Month. Now, according to research, diabetes is the third largest cause of blindness worldwide. Yet the devices used to treat the disease are widely inaccessible. Now, Derek Lackey is an accessibility advocate who lost his eyesight due to complications with type 1 diabetes. He launched a campaign to petition Health Canada to help narrow the divide between treatment tools and accessibility. Derek, welcome to Access Tech Live.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Now, Derek, you lost your sight, as I say, in 2013, nearly 10 years after you were diagnosed with diabetes. What kind of treatment plan were you on at the time for your diabetes?
Actually, I was diagnosed in 1994, so that's like almost 20 years after I had lost my eyesight. And, at that point in time, it was injections and, finger sticks, taking your glucose readings through the meter. And it wasn't until early 2000 and 2001 that I received my first insulin pump and began pump therapy rather than injections. But I was still using the finger sticks to monitor my glucose levels.
Did you, Derek, have an advantage, you think, in your treatment because, you used tools like glucose monitoring while you were still sighted?
I wouldn't necessarily call it an advantage because definitely once I had lost my eyesight in 2013, it really became a struggle to monitor those glucose levels. Trying to use the finger sticks to monitor those levels was extremely exhausting and stressful, not knowing if you had enough blood or if you had gotten enough blood into the test strip, making sure that you could get it every single time. You could end up going through 5 or 6 test strips at a time, which kind of defeated the purpose of purchasing, your supplies based on monthly standard, because now there was this extra level of hindrance that you had to deal with that made it much more hard to deal with.
Derek, diabetes is one of these things that the technology has actually played a pretty significant positive role on, I think, when you think about, the app-controlled devices like Freestyle Libre and the various companies that make this continuous glucose monitoring. Is that the same when it comes to things like the insulin pumps themselves?
No, the insulin pumps themselves are very archaic in a sense, as it's been well over 20 years ago that the National Federation for the Blind and the American Foundation for the Blind actually did a research project on not only your glucose monitoring equipment as well as the insulin pump therapies. And it's been over 20 years, and we've seen that there's still no progress made in making any kind of accessibility movement forward, in a sense, when it comes to insulin pump therapy, other than the newest integration of maybe adding an iPhone or Android application to be able to communicate to the insulin pump itself to find out at least your basics of your current basal rate, the number of units you have on board, and battery levels and reservoir levels.
It's interesting to hear you talk about this, Derek, because I've had a lot of people get in touch with me on my Double Tap show having issues with this. Being blind themselves, having issues using these devices, getting access to them. Is this the reason you decided to start this campaign?
Well, it's definitely the reason I jumped on board, is because now, I lived so much of my life as a sighted individual and suddenly found myself in this entirely new world and still dealing with this same monster, so to speak, that diabetes as a disease is. Because really it affects everyone. And it's like a secondary life. It's not even a job, because a job, you work your daily hours, your weekly hours, and eventually you retire. Whereas this is like a second life that you have to live with another part of your life. It just never goes away, and it's 24/7, 365 all the time. So finding myself now dealing with how do I monitor my glucose levels when I'm going through so many test strips and so many Lancets, and it's costing exponentially more number of dollars every month to try and monitor accurately. And the old days of 3 times a day monitoring your glucose levels was a thing of the past, and now 6 times or more a day was much more the common norm. So it really became, how do I look at what is available and how do I, make it known and become a voice and express my discontent with where our management and overall access to these life-changing therapies are for us in this today.
Derek, I think of medical equipment manufacturers almost like big pharma, where we know they're in it, for the profit at the end of the day, while they're still providing, a service that we need and trying to help us. Why do you think there's such a divide between these manufacturers? And I know they're not all the same. And treatment for diabetes, and accessibility of that treatment. Why do you think there's such a separation there?
I'm not sure, because we look back at the iPhone coming in with voiceover back in the early 2000s and bringing that access and that technology forward, and knowing that there's these manufacturers of medical equipment that have fallen so far into the past. It's almost baffling to understand, like, why has this not become just an integrated part of our daily access and technology? It's becoming so mainstream when it comes to smart speakers, the phones, televisions, appliances. Everything is becoming so advanced with the smart technology, yet here's our medical industry falling behind. And slowly but surely, our continuous glucose monitoring systems have really kind of jumped in leaps and bounds forward, and becoming more accessible for us as blind users. But yet other facets like insulin injections, pens, and pump therapies are so far behind. It's just inconceivable to think that 8% of the global population of this planet identifies as having some kind of effect with diabetes, and yet we have completely just turned a very large blind eye, so to speak, on that population.
Yeah, and especially as blindness is so intrinsically linked with diabetes as well, right? So this campaign has been going for a while. What has the response been to your efforts? Have you had response from these companies?
Well, like I said, when it comes to CGM systems, there are various companies out there. I've used several of them. I'm currently using the Dexcom G7 myself, which is, if you can see this little device here, for those who are sighted, it's this tiny little device that's even 60% smaller than its predecessor, the G6. But they have been an absolutely phenomenal company to deal with in creating full autonomy when it has come to dealing with my glucose levels and creating a more autonomous lifestyle when it comes to dealing with your diabetes. Now, when it comes to the pump companies themselves, we have received good feedback from the 4 manufacturers here in Canada, and we have several of them on board, joining forces with the AFB, the NFB, CNIB, as well as Diabetes Canada, in looking to the World Health Organization to make it known and make it a goal in the future to move towards a more accessible insulin pump and manufacturing that which is needed for this very large portion of the population that's, so to speak, been left in the dust.
Yeah, Derek, you and I talked off the air preparing for this. I said we're gonna follow up in a couple of months, have you back on the show, and try to get some of these companies on board as well to have a conversation about accessibility on their devices. So we will definitely follow up with you in a couple of months and do that. Before we let you go, Derek, I got to ask you the question of the day. If you were to tell somebody one thing about your disability, what would that be?
You know, the biggest thing I'd have to say about not only my blindness, but my diabetes as well, because diabetes, you know, in a sense can be a disability. They're both invisible. I mean, I very often or not have been accused of not being blind or not having any problems because you can't physically see it on the outside. It's not a very visible disease or a visible disability. And it's really unfortunate because you know, like David said before, we don't all share the exact same issues, and everyone's looking for, you know, someone that looks like, you know, uh, Ray Charles or, you know, Stevie Wonder, you know, expecting me to be wearing my black glasses, waving my head around and talking real funny or being a musician. And that's really not the case. And it's such a stereotype. It really is discouraging when people just have such a lack of knowledge when it just comes to, you know, diseases as a general, you know.
Yeah, and it's so funny you say those particular examples because there are a lot of us who say we don't want to look disabled, but some of us don't know what that means either. We're told we don't look disabled, and I don't, still to this day don't really understand what that means. Derek Lackey, it's been really interesting talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your views on this. And you know, these conversations are important, so thank you for coming on to Access Tech Live.
I'd like to thank you and Marc as well for, you know, bringing light to this subject and making it known and bringing it out publicly, because it's something that really needs to change in today's day and age.
Thanks, Derek. Coming up, the Tripping on Air podcast annual gift guide and giveaway is on now. Lots of really cool tech items are up for grabs. The host of that show and TV series Fashion This that you can find on AMI Plus, Arja Shepard, joins us next to highlight some of those ideas. This is Access Tech Live. Stephen, I will learn how to speak, I promise.
We want to hear from you. Follow us on social media and get involved at Access Tech Live. We'll be right back. The latest in tech and accessibility. This is Access Tech Live with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Welcome back. Now, Tripping on Air is an AMI original podcast and is named after the blog of the same name. And every year they put out their annual gift guide and giveaway. Here to tell us all about it is the host of the aforementioned show, Arja Shepard. Welcome back to Access Tech Live.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
So, Arja, what is the goal of the gift guide every year?
The goal of the gift guide is really to share some of the products and services that I discovered throughout the year that help me manage my own MS a little bit better, that just maybe make my life more comfortable. I would also say that it's really fun to feel like Oprah or Santa and to give away some really cool stuff.
Okay, so we got to ask you what some of the highlights are, because there are so many items on the gift guide this year and every single year, quite honestly. There's no way that we could possibly get to them all on this show. I know the episode itself was almost an hour long. So, and in no particular order, Ardra, and you don't have to say which one is your favorite, but you can wink for us, okay? And we'll tell the audience. What are your highlights?
I mean, I'm going to start with jewelry. Jacqueline Lepuck Jewelry. She's a jewelry artist. She makes really beautiful pieces. She also happens to have MS. So that's a really nice way, I think, to engage the community from both sides. One of the items that we are giving away is a carnelian bead bracelet that she designed as part of her MS Hope collection. Carnelian represents courage and endurance and hope. And I think it's such a lovely gift for someone to have that can feel like a talisman, something that you can physically touch to be reminded of those qualities that a lot of us with MS or any chronic illness or just really life in general, when you're feeling the need to tap into your own courage and endurance, those kind of things, I think it's a really special gift. I would also talk about the MS Gym. Oh, and I should say we are giving away 2 of the carnelian bead bracelets on the gift guide, which is really exciting. So thank you, Jacqueline Lepuck Jewelry, for that. I want to talk about the MS Gym, which is an online platform and physiotherapy program that uses neuromuscular movement training to improve symptoms of MS. It is more than that, though. It's really a platform to connect with other people with MS. They call themselves gymmers. They have targeted programs that you can follow in your home. You might see me in this space doing my physio in the new year. Yeah.
Is that part of the giveaway? The benefit is getting to see you in the gym membership?
I mean, yeah, I don't know if that's a perk, but we are giving away a 3-month membership to a lucky winner too. So that's awesome. Very exciting. Yeah. And that's then awesome.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Can I keep highlighting?
Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
Really excited if you follow me at all, then you are familiar with my love and affection for bi-acre rollators, which are maybe the most stylish way to get around if you need a rollator. We have one carbon ultralight to give away in their new color blue, which is very exciting. But almost more exciting is the Nordic Pioneer, which is a model that they have just dropped. And it has all the same cool style features of the original, but it is coming in at a lower price point. So this product actually just launched, so it's particularly exciting because you'll be one of the first to have this.
Okay, so look, you're not going to get out of here without telling us your favorite. Okay, so I'm going to take the gym membership out of the equation for a second. You're kind of part of that. Okay, so I'm going to take that one away. So which is it that you like most?
I mean, you know what? I would say go to the gift guide to see all of the ideas. There is a lap desk that I am particularly coveting, but if I'm totally under pressure, you're always going to win with me with jewelry.
Okay. I was thinking that might be the case somehow, but yeah, because I have to say these are fantastic items, and I just love the fact that you're involving people who have MS, who've been creating these products for people with MS, by people with MS. It's just such a wonderful, positive thing that you're doing here.
Thank you. I mean, it's exciting for me that the community at large wants to get involved. We have brands on this list that aren't affiliated with MS at all. We have a beautiful giveaway from Indy Lee, which is a cosmetics company, but they're really invested in the autoimmune community, the wellness movement in general. And so it's nice to see that brands in general recognize that there is a market within the disability community, the chronic illness community, and they want to tap into that. And we want to see ourselves represented there as well.
So if people want to get involved in the giveaway, they can obviously go to ami.ca/TOA contest. That's the URL. They should listen to the podcast episode, which is available.
What are you doing?
now,
That's like a bit of a cheat, right? You got to watch the episode before you
Well,
enter.
yeah, I mean, okay, so forget about the URL, guys. I said nothing. Go listen to the podcast first, then come back and we'll tell you where to find it. When can they enter until? What's the deadline to enter?
The deadline is December 7th at midnight, and you can enter once a day until then. So you've got some time, but yeah, get those notes into Santa.
I like it. Okay, before we let you go, Ardra, the question we're asking everybody today is about yourself. If you could tell somebody one thing about your MS, what would it be?
I think what I really want people to know is that a difficult life doesn't have to be a joyless life.
Well said. I love that.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ardra. Again, go check out the podcast, Tripping on Air, available wherever you get your podcast now. It's one of the great AMI original podcasts. And of course, Fashion This on AMI Plus, and the URL, by the way, ami.ca/TOA contest. That is Ardra Shepherd right here on Access Tech Live. I said it properly this time, Stephen, I promise. Okay,
You're
we're going to take yeah, I know. When we take a quick break, we're going to come back. Lots of answers to that question. So stick around. We'll be right back in a couple of moments here on Access Tech Live.
We want to hear from you. Follow us on social media and get involved at Access Tech Live. We'll be right back. The latest in tech and accessibility. This is Access Tech Live with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Welcome back to Access Tech Live as we go into our final segment. I am Stephen Scott. Marc Aflalo is with me. Before we get to your answers, though, to our question of the day, another episode of the AMI original podcast, Shaun of the Shed, launches today. Now, this month, Shaun tackles Be My Eyes and Seeing AI. That is available right now wherever you get your podcasts. So search for Shaun of the Shed. That's S-H-A-U-N, as he likes to tell us, Marc, the proper way to spell Shaun. I think that's controversial, if I'm honest. But yeah, check it out. Shaun of the Shed, available where you get good and bad podcasts everywhere.
I think some might debate that spelling of his name, but I'm really looking forward to this episode. So let's get to today's question, because we got a lot of people sending in their feedback, which is cool. Again, if you want to send your feedback in, you can do it after the show too. It's at Access Tech Live, of course, on all our social media, and of course our email address, feedback@accesstechlive.com as well. But Stephen Scott, I got to ask you what your answer to the question would be, which is, if you were to tell someone one thing about your disability, what would that be, Mr. Scott?
You know, Dave kind of stole it for me a little bit when he said it's complicated, because I think that's it for me, right? I think it is complicated to explain. I think what I say to people is just ask questions. Don't be frightened to ask any questions, because I know some people don't like that. Some people feel it's intrusive, and I understand that. And we're all at different stages of our journey. And I think people need to also be aware that it's important for us sometimes to just be a little bit mindful. Because, look, we're not medical conditions walking around. That's why I'm a person with a disability, not a disabled person, in my view, right? I'm not a walking medical condition. And I'm also not here for you to constantly challenge on my disability. So feel free to ask questions. But, as I say about everything in life, Mark, you can ask me the question. You might not always like the answer, but feel free to ask the question anyway. And I think conversations like this today have been really helpful.
Okay, so let's get back to let's get to some of the answers to the questions. Emma Blackmore wrote us, some days are better than others. One day I can be on the go. The next I will want to rest and do nothing or not do anything. This doesn't make me lazy. Recharging helps my pain levels and being able to function. It's a great answer. Ewan Bell writes, I don't think many people appreciate that, quote, learning to live, end quote, with a disability doesn't mean it's cured. Every day for the rest of your life, it's there. We get better at coping, sometimes to the point that others don't even recognize it even exists. But there are good days and there are bad days. It's with you every single day. And some days you feel like you're 5 years old again, learning how to get through the day. Great perspective there.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that's the bit about it, right? It's not, this word overcome is used a lot, and no one overcomes it. It's not a hill to climb. It's something we live with. And the learning to live with part is us learning to live with what condition we have and learning to cope with it. And like everything in life, like grief, for example, it gets easier to some degree every day. Some days it's hard, some days it's tough. And of course, it depends on the type of disability as well. So lots, there's so much in this.
Got an answer here from Uncovered Myths. I like that name. It's the combination of disabilities that makes life and going out impossible. Deaf, blind, limited mobility, use a power chair, MCAS, EDS, high risk fall, full body, bubbly hives, below 75 degrees, gluten intolerant, coconut and green pepper allergies, difficulty comprehending speech, especially fast speech, no bladder or bowel control. I am sure I forgot something. It's a great answer. By the way, MCAS is mast cell activation syndrome, and EDS is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I mean, great answers from people. And this is what's interesting about this is you get so many different opinions and perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's great that we're talking about this, because this is the reality, right? And like I say, for some people, disability can be, limited to a nuisance. To some people, it is a complete control over their lives, and there's nothing much we can do about it. And it's everything in between. And it's so important we share that knowledge for people, because it's not a hayride.
Yeah. Alma writes, blindness is not always a bad thing. Short, simple, to the point. I mean, it's a great perspective. I got one from Wendy here, who happens to be my wife, and talking about my son, Zach, who identifies as an autistic person, not a person who has autism. And she writes, autism doesn't have a look, in quotes. Please stop assuming that every autistic person is the same. It's called a spectrum for a reason. And he's actually had a teacher who said he doesn't look autistic before. So we asked them to draw us a picture of what that looks like, because every single experience is a different one.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it is the key thing here, and it's very difficult when you talk about identity, because there's a sense that there's always a little bit of gatekeeping going on, and we're deciding for people what they should and shouldn't call themselves, how they should identify themselves. And I am not on that page. If you listen to me on Double Tap every day, you'll hear this come up time and time and time again from my point of view as a blind guy. And I often talk about this, and I say, look, you identify however you want to identify, but let's not criticize others for how they choose to identify. Live the life you want to live, and announce yourself as you wish to be announced. But, if you meet me in the street, I'm Stephen, I'm not blind. So, that's me. But I think that there are lots and lots of us out there who face challenges and face very nuanced challenges. And I think we can all come to one simple agreement, Mark, and you must realize this as well. You must be picking up on this from the months and years we've worked together doing this show. It's a very complicated area. It's not simple. There's not just one answer to this. It is complicated. Dave said it perfectly.
Yeah. Speaking of Dave, again, December 3rd, International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I want to ask you a question that I asked him, which is, do you think society is doing a decent enough job? I mean, he threw out the stat of 60% of spaces in a couple of, major Canadian cities are not accessible. I know you live on the other side of the pond, so to speak. So, experiences are definitely different for you. So what's your perspective there?
I think the UK has actually done a pretty decent job in some ways. It's also doing an incredible job of rolling a lot of that back. And there's a lot of interesting political movement going on here, which some might see as anti-disability. But I do think that society in general has improved massively. Now, of course, I think about this initially from the role of through technology and the importance of how technology has enabled so many of us to do what we do. But I do think, though, that it's on us as well as disabled people to tell our stories, to share the good and the bad and the ugly of our disability, as we've been doing here, because it's important we share those views. But it can't all be negative. It can't all be positive either, right? It has to be somewhere in the middle, and we have to tell the whole story. Society can play its role, for sure, but we are people too. We have agency, and it's important that we share that. It's important that we talk about that, and it's important we take control of our own lives where we can as well.
Stephen, thank you for being here, obviously, every single week at home. Thank you for watching. On behalf of our guests, Dave Brown, Derek Lackey, and Arda Shepherd, thank you for being here. Next week, we're going to give you some gift ideas for the entire family. So I want you to get your holiday hats on and get your pen and paper out so you can figure out exactly what you want to get for those family members. Thanks for watching. Catch you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Access Tech Live. Follow us online at all social media at Access Tech Live. Email us feedback at accesstechlive.com. Hosted by Stephen Scott in Glasgow and Marc Aflalo in Montreal. Written by Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo. Live show director, Anastasia Spalding-Stenhouse. Technical director, Caitlin Robinson. Audio, Jordan Mulgrave. Live graphics and playback, Kingsley Juco. Graphics coordinator, Eliza Rocco. Integrated Described Video Specialist, M. Williams. Supervising producer, Michelle Dudas. Copyright 2023, Accessible Media, Inc.
An AMI original production.